The Baltimore Ravens lose in disgusting fashion to the Cleveland Browns, 33-31 in Week 10. We talk about what it means for the Ravens, how they blew this one, the injuries to Marlon Humphrey and Ronnie Stanley, and so much more coming up next on this post-game reaction, instant reaction episode of Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Ostreicher of Ravens Wire, here with you on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for being here on this not so fun defeat Sunday, making Locked On Ravens your first listen each and every day or evening now. We're free and available all podcasting platforms. That includes in video form on YouTube and anywhere you get your audio podcast. Today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off of your first purchase. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. We are back here with, again, not a fun one to talk about as Baltimore loses by the final score of 33-31. For the Ravens, though, it was a missed opportunity for sure. The Browns played really sloppy in this game. The Ravens had plenty of opportunities. Now, I'm not trying to excuse how Baltimore played. They were also very sloppy, made multiple poor decisions. We'll get into all of that. But they fall to 7-3 on the season and could have really taken advantage, giving Cleveland a loss. And then also, with Cincinnati losing to Houston, could have distanced themselves even further from them with a big Thursday night matchup incoming. So we'll talk about what happened in this game. Also, the injuries to Marlon Humphrey and Ronnie Stanley. John Harbaugh didn't give any updates at his post-game presser, but we will talk about what it could mean if those two are out either for a long time or hopefully not the season. Then we'll talk about what's next for the Ravens because I think it's really important to look ahead. Now, we still have to talk about what went wrong. They have to fix that stuff, but there's a lot to work on for Baltimore, a lot to talk about here today. So again, we're a 5-day-a-week Ravens podcast here just quickly. Also, we do live shows after every game like this. So be sure to subscribe, follow along in audio form. The communities we've built here, it's awesome. Also on Subtext, if you want to subscribe over the links in the description below here, we're bringing your Ravens news, analysis, updates, the best daily coverage here for the Baltimore Ravens. And I just want to start here. I mean, it's honestly tough. I don't know where exactly to start. I think let's start with the offense first because we saw a lot of good things in the first half for the offense. I thought that Baltimore was doing some good things, but then you move to the second half, and I don't know what happened with the play calling, but all of a sudden the Ravens begin to abandon the run, and it was these throws where the Browns defense, they lose Denzel Ward, they lose Juan Thornhill, so you're putting in a bunch of guys who, Martin Emerson's not bad, and guys like Grant Delpit are still out there, but the Ravens offense just was not able to capitalize, and I think a lot of that, it was execution for sure. Lamar threw that ball to Rashad Bateman at the end of the first half, which was just severely underthrown. He took the blame for that, as he should have, but it just, the timing wasn't there. There was the one, obviously, quick hitter to Odell, a 40-yard touchdown, but it just seemed like there was no rhythm. And there were some fluke plays, like the ball getting tipped up for a pick six. That rarely happens, but you got to deal with it. And the fact that the Ravens were in that situation was because they could not slam the door on this Cleveland Browns team. And, I don't want to just rag on the offense because it wasn't like they were horrible the entire game, but it's what we've been talking about the entire season, where if this team has pure and clear Super Bowl aspirations, they're going to be a team that can more often than not play a full, consistent 60-minute football game. It doesn't have to be all 60 minutes, right? It'd be ideal if it was. But these AFC North games are, tough games. They're gritty games. They're grinded out games. But Baltimore is in such a good position at half. Their defense was doing what their defense usually does, which is that bend, don't break. Yeah, you know what? You can get into the red zone. You can take the short stuff on us, but we're not going to let you score in the red zone. And they held Cleveland to 3 points each time they were down there. So 9 points at the half for Cleveland compared to 17. But after that 17-point first quarter, Baltimore scored 14 for the rest of the game. And Cleveland it was domination all across the board for Cleveland in the second half for the most part. Cleveland had a 10-minute drive. They held the ball for about 10 minutes more than the Ravens, 34-15 compared to 25-45. And that's the kind of game that Cleveland wanted. They were taking the short stuff to David Njoku with some trickles in there of, all right, we're going to throw a 15-yard pass to Amari Cooper. But Njoku was bullying the Ravens offensively, defensively in the trenches. Baltimore was bullied there too. And you could tell Cleveland was playing with a sense of purpose in the second half. Baltimore, to me at least, did not have that same amount of urgency. And you could see it. Third down, Baltimore went 2 of 8. That you can't win games like that. In the red zone, Baltimore went 1 of 2 and held Cleveland to 2 of 5. That should honestly be enough, but only 2 red zone attempts for the Ravens. They just didn't get down there. Nothing. Look, it was because Keaton Mitchell had the long touchdown. Odell had the long touchdown. That doesn't tell the whole story, obviously. But at the end of the day, Cleveland ran 25 more total plays than the Ravens did, 75 compared to 50. Now, Baltimore averaged more yards per play. Obviously, that is aided by long plays from Keaton Mitchell, multiple of those, and you have the Odell Beckham touchdown. But on the day, Lamar went 13 of 23, 223 yards, 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions. One of those is squarely on Lamar's shoulders, the underthrow to Rashad Bateman. The other one, I will say, the ball just gets tipped at the line. But it was plays like that. It was the tipped interception. It was the blocked field goal where the Ravens, they lose this game by 2. If Tucker hits that field goal, they win it by 1. So it's just the Ravens had a ton. Look, the Browns, it's frustrating to me at least because the Browns looked, at least in the first half, really bad. And in the second half, they made their fair share of mistakes. 2 holding calls or 2 defensive holding calls in the red zone where Baltimore was going to be limited to a field goal. They score the touchdown instead. James Prochet fumbles to get them in that situation. And obviously it took a long time. Points are points, but it wasn't as efficient and wasn't as urgent, in my opinion here. And we have the chat popping here, obviously. David Garcia, one of the listeners over here, Locked On Ravens, saying, it's okay, Ravens, shake it off. There's a lot of football to play, big dogs. And Up South Q saying, exactly, David, it was a good game. We just have to beat the Bengals. And that's a good point there from Up South, because now I think, and Bobby Trossett, who does great work over at Ravens Vault and other places too, he said ultimately this game against the Bengals on Thursday, does it become a must-win game? Bobby thinks so. I honestly think it's almost at that category right now because you still have a 2-game lead on the Bengals or I think 2-game lead on the Bengals, or maybe it's 1. I can't remember the exact records right now. I'll look them up. But the AFC North is so tight right now. You got to win that game. If you don't win that game, your divisional record drops to 2-3. And your conference record drops even further. So that's really bad as well. Now, Kamal in here saying we're going to bounce back. Ravens spot for life for sure. I mean, I think that the Ravens, there is a bounce back opportunity, but that doesn't, I think, make this game any less frustrating, especially because it was right there for the Ravens. And what have we seen? This Ravens team can beat themselves. But look, you got to give credit to Cleveland a little bit in terms of they took it to the Ravens in the second half. The Ravens were out physicaled in both trenches, offensive line, defensive line. The Browns teams have had some level of difficulty consistently running on the Ravens in this game. Jerome Ford averaged 6.3 yards per carry. I was a big Jerome Ford guy. He was my draft crush last year. Cleveland got him running back wise, and then my draft crush this year was Keaton Mitchell running back wise. And so I'm at 1 for 2 on those. But it seemed like in this game, we'll get into this defensively too. The Ravens missed maybe 6 tackles that were either at the line of scrimmage or behind. They missed multiple sacks in this game. We've talked about that for years here on this show. Many people have talked about it as well. And, Felix saying SMH, I think that's the mood of a lot of the fan base right now. But Up South saying the Browns are a good team. We didn't lose to a bum team. I agree. Cleveland's not a bad team. And especially when you take into account the divisional aspect of things, these games get weird really quickly. But I think it's frustrating because it comes at the hands of a team. Deshaun Watson was clearly injured. And I mean, look, despite everything that's going on with him, he was motivated in this game. It felt like there was some extra edge to Deshaun Watson in the second half. It didn't look like that in the first half, but I don't know what happened. Something flipped for him. The Browns were pushing. David Njoku the Ravens did not have the same fight that I've seen from them. And it was a loss. Justin Madubuike called it a loss that shouldn't have happened. I mean, I definitely agree with that. It was definitely a loss that shouldn't have happened as well. And a comment here from Eugene Bull saying, Harbs consistently makes mistakes that even good coaches get fired for after just 2 to 3 times. Only conclusion after 10 years is the organization cares more about vanity than results. done giving them money. We're going to talk about that in the second segment. That's a loaded comment there. We're going to talk about it and a lot more coming up in the second part of this live edition of Locked On Ravens, coming to you after, again, the Ravens disappointing and quite frankly disgusting 33-31 loss to the Cleveland Browns in Week 10. So be sure to stay tuned. We still have a lot to get to here on Locked On Ravens. First, this episode is brought to you by Gametime. And look, if you were at the game, you probably bought a ticket there. I don't know how frustrating the ticketing experience was to get those tickets, but for me, I've had a lot of those, whether it's not being able to find out if the seats were good or not. Sometimes last-minute tickets weren't available. Sometimes for me, I can't even find good deals anywhere. But you shouldn't have to worry when you're buying those tickets to your next big event, because Gametime is a fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. And they have killer last-minute deals, all in prices, views from receipt, and the best price guarantee. Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. In the Gametime app, obviously, there's a big game. We talked about it coming up for the Ravens, that Bengals game, Thursday Night Football. You can find tickets over on the Gametime app there. Plus, there are concerts in the Baltimore area. There's a lot over at Gametime in this area. Then they have those last-minute tickets, flash deals, zone deals as well. And Gametime's the only ticketing app that gives you complete peace of mind with your purchase. You can see the view from your seat before you buy, so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. Plus, they're obsessed with finding you ways to help you save money on those tickets. And Gametime has deals on tickets right after they started the event, and even an hour after it starts. It's the place to find those last-minute seats. So say guess we're going to buy tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNFL, spelled LOCKEDONNFL, for $20 off. Download Gametime to last-minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. We're back. It's our second segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still talking with you here. Thank you for tuning in after a loss. I know it's really tough to honestly consume any content regarding your team when a loss, especially a frustrating loss like this, happens. So I appreciate you spending time with me, getting your thoughts out and the frustrations, whether good thoughts, bad thoughts. I appreciate you spending some time with me here on Locked On Ravens. Now let's get back to the comment from Margin Bull. And I think for me, John Harbaugh, and I've said this, if this is your first time listening to the show, first of all, thank you for tuning in. But if you listen to me every day, you've heard me say this before. If the Ravens make the playoffs this year and lose in the wild card round or the divisional round, in my opinion, with the way the Ravens seasons have gone, you can talk about injuries, this, that, and the other. A change needs to happen. Now, the Ravens have gotten rid of 2 coordinators in 2 years. Don Martindale last year, Greg Roman this past offseason. Where do you go next? Do you fire the special teams coordinator and give John Harbaugh another year? Or do you continue to live with this complacency of, hey, we're going to be a pretty solid regular season team, but then when the playoffs happens, we shrink? Now, that hasn't happened yet. Still a long way to go in the regular season, and obviously the playoffs haven't started yet, too. I'd anticipate this Ravens team makes the playoffs. But for John Harbaugh, there is a sense of, at least in some of the fan base I've noticed, of how long is too long. We've seen long tenures of Bill Belichick and Mike Tomlin and John Harbaugh, and all tenures are different. But for the Ravens, I don't know where they go after this season if it doesn't result in at least an AFC Championship game. Again, we're far from that point. But games like this, I think, are frustrating in the fact that whether it be certain getting his ready situations, I don't know. But John Harbaugh, I think this is a big year for him, especially if things don't go to plan as well. Evan in the chat saying, tough loss whenever the Ravens face adversity in the second half. It's like that SpongeBob meme where they threw out his name. Old problems continue to haunt the team. I mean, some of those, look, the missed sacks, the missed tackles, all of that is just so frustrating for this team, especially when you talk about how good they have been and how, honestly, how good they've shown they can be. Like, it's not just the Ravens have been kind of iffy this year and they've been okay. So this loss it's like, fine. A loss like this for a team that has such high aspirations, for a team that has appeared so locked in for most of the season, the way they dominated in this first half and then obviously come out in the second just honestly flat is what it was. Now, again, they score 7 in the third, 7 in the fourth, but Cleveland, I think, just out-hustled him, out-physicaled him, and that, to me, was where the big turning point happened. If there was a turning point in this game, I mean, look, I thought it was the James Prochet fumble, honestly. I thought that would turn the tides back. Baltimore has a 2-score lead, and you're kind of done with it because Cleveland's offense. But the Ravens' defense was getting pushed off for their spots. And you know what a big turning point was, in my opinion, honestly? Marlon Humphrey going down. Marlon Humphrey going down was huge. You could see the Browns begin to gain confidence in the passing game. Humphrey goes down, and we will talk about the injuries. Obviously, no updates from John Harbaugh about those right now. We will see if those are season-ending injuries with Marlon Humphrey. Obviously, the other one I'm referring to is Ronnie Stanley. Now, there was an injury to Humphrey, later. He comes into the game with a hamstring. They play him in the game. The slow motion replay of the Humphrey injury, it was non-contact, no one around him. He goes down and he grabs the lower back of his leg. And that can mean a couple of things. Now, the one that everybody's talking about right now is a torn Achilles. Obviously, when that happens to players, and I multiple times talking about Achilles injuries, obviously the Ravens have gone through multiple as well, and obviously other sports, baseball, basketball, whatever you want to say. When the Achilles happens, it's a pop and it essentially snaps. And what it feels like is someone kicking you in the back of the leg. And this happened with Karl Anthony. I'm going to put basketball into it for a second. Karl Anthony Towns last year against the Washington Wizards. He has an injury that kind of looks similar. Now, he goes down and he kind of jumps and looks back. Now, Humphrey didn't look back, but that was it wasn't a torn Achilles for Karl Anthony Towns. It was a severe calf strain when everybody thought that was a torn Achilles for him. Now, Karl Anthony Towns missed about 4 or 5 months. So if it is the same injury Karl Anthony Towns suffered, it's obviously better for the long-term prospects of the future for Marlon in terms of his recovery, but that probably still ends his season if it's the same type of injury Karl Anthony Towns suffered. If it's a torn Achilles, obviously it ends his season this year and probably, depending on recovery for him, might trickle into next year. So that's a huge one. Again, I haven't seen any updates on that right now. We're coming to you right about an hour after the game right now, so maybe there'll be an update tonight or tomorrow. And when that happens, if they are season-ending injuries for Humphrey and or Stanley, will go live back here on Locked On Ravens. I'll be sure to turn notifications on for that. But you could see that Rocky Ya-Sin was having some trouble, made a couple of plays, but had some trouble. He decked Cedric Tillman, out of bounds. Well, it's peanuts, right? Charles Tillman, Marlon Humphrey, but decked Cedric Tillman out of bounds and was like, what did I do? Well, you disrupted the receiver's path when the ball's in the air. So I think that Humphrey not being out there was huge for them. Look, we can talk about Brandon Stevens playing admirable football, but Marlon Humphrey would be a huge loss for them as well. Evan, again, yeah, that's a good comment from him saying old problems because the missed sacks. Again, that's another big thing as well. Margin, again, still talking about John Harbaugh for 10 years has been everyone's fault besides the common denominator, which is Harbaugh. Yeah, again, at a point, you have to kind of, they fired both coordinators and they've done this and they've done that. And where are we? If it's a divisional loss or a wild card loss, I think at that point you kind of got to make a decision. Dylan saying Mitchell should be getting more touches. Let's talk about Keaton Mitchell for a second. Good point by Dylan. Keaton Mitchell had a great game, but was not fed the ball enough. 3 carries for 34 yards, had that long 39-yard touchdown. Also, one reception, for 32 yards. He averaged 16.5 yards per touch. He had 3 touches in the first half, only 1 touch in the second half. He got his last touch, I believe, 2 minutes to go in the third quarter. I mean, look, we heard all week the Ravens saying, oh, Keaton's, he's done this right and he's earned a bigger role. I mean, the Ravens should act like it then, right? I mean, they need to, if they give him all this praise, and it wasn't like he had 2 carries for -2 yards and it's like, oh, okay, well, it's not working. It was clearly working. He had the juice, his jump cut on his touchdown to work it upfield and just turn on the burners. That's speed that not a lot of players have. I get that it didn't work on his last 2 touches, but I mean, you got to keep feeding the guy, especially when Gus Edwards did not have a strong game in this one, all things considered. 11 for 24, that's 2.2 yards per carry for him. I mean, Keaton Mitchell, even with a -7-yard run and a 2-yard run, averaged 11.3 yards per carry on 3 touches. That's incredible to me, and I think that the Ravens definitely should have given him more touches, and the fact that they didn't is pretty inexcusable as well. Let's see. Victor saying so many unnecessary sacks for Lamar, just getting the field goal range. Yeah, the Ravens were definitely in field goal range, and 2 straight sacks by Lamar to knock him right out. That's stuff where, again, in a 2-point game, you get Justin Tucker on the field, you win by 1. That's just what happens. Cedric saying team needs a bye week. We just didn't have the physicality today. Yeah, their bye week is coming late. It's going to be, but the thing is, we're in week 10 right now. They still have 2 huge games coming up against the Bengals and the Chargers before that bye happens. So maybe it's going to be without Marlon, maybe without Ronnie Stanley too. Now, the Stanley play, there wasn't a replay. At least I didn't see one. Maybe there was. But the reports is that he got rolled up on. And, we saw what happened. He was pounding the turf in a lot of pain. On a 5-day turnaround, that's rough. Kevin Zeitler goes down. He said, we'll see when it comes to playing. I mean, other guys that went down. Who else went down? Zay Flowers went down for a minute. He came back in. Jadeveon Clowney went down for a minute. He came back too. Travis Jones limped off the field. I mean, there were injuries galore in this game for the Ravens after they'd stayed relatively healthy. So hopefully it's nothing serious for those guys. But again, I think a bye week, as Cedric said, would come in handy for them as well. Justin saying, got to get Keaton more touches. Yep, lightning in a bottle for sure. Now, Margin has an interesting point about the trade deadline, or Magine, excuse me, has an interesting point about the trade deadline. Ravens punted at the trade deadline, and that decision is aging like milk, seems to be an annual tradition. We'll talk about that because that is an interesting comment, and I want to get into it as well. Magine with the good comments here. So we'll be talking about that in the final part of the show. We still have lots to get to on this live edition of Locked On Ravens. Once again, coming to you after Baltimore's pretty disappointing. I think that's the word I'll use. Pretty disappointing 33-31 loss to the Cleveland Browns in week 10. First, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. And I know a lot of people had high hopes for this game for the Ravens and the Browns, but unfortunately for the Ravens side of things, it didn't work out for maybe Lamar. Keaton Mitchell touchdown, though. If you picked Keaton Mitchell touchdown, you're living large at least. And you can score early this season with FanDuel, America's number one sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 money line bet. That's $150 if your team wins. And if you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, again, there's no better place to get in on that action. Gap is super easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options that include the spreads, player props, over-unders, and a lot more. So maybe for the Ravens and Bengals game, that hopefully better result for the Ravens, but there'll be probably some good props over there on FanDuel. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. We're back rounding out Locked On Ravens. Kevin Ostreicher still live with you here on this Sunday evening edition of the show. Baltimore falls 33-31 to the Cleveland Browns. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode. Again, right after the Ravens lose, it's always tough. I appreciate that. I appreciate the communities we've built. It's been awesome to see all that forming here. And be sure to subscribe, follow along as well in audio form and video form. And if you're catching it live here, but maybe you can't catch it live another time, be sure you can catch it right in audio form after the fact. They're posted pretty soon after the fact. I'm trying to catch up on comments here. We got the comments rolling. I'm not sure. I'm going to try to get to all of them, trying to do a speed run. But let's get into the comment from Magine here, who says, again, Ravens punted at the trade deadline, and that decision is aging like milk. I mean, I get it, because having a Derrick Henry, a Saquon Barkley, Josh Jacobs, that would be fun, right? But for the most part, if Baltimore's offensive line plays better, I think that decision, at least this week, would look a lot better. Maybe if you want to talk about adding a corner, maybe if that's what you're talking about, I can understand that. I think a Dante Jackson or Rasul Douglas would have been a big move for them to make as well. I see Rob Cunningham saying amazing win, Cleveland. So we got some Browns fans, it feels like, in the chat too. But yeah, Justin saying giving up 17 yards on 2nd and 19 is inexcusable, cost us the game. And Zach saying they might be a little confused on the defensive end, trying to get Snow, Williams, and Hamilton on the field together as well. Yeah, they're going to have some decisions to make for sure about how they utilize those guys. You can't really run base because it takes one of those guys off the field. So 3 safety looks as a Kyle Hamilton in the slot. Do you move Arthur Millette off at the sideline at that point? We'll see. Let's see. Good America official. Never thought a 33-point game could look so ugly. I could tell they're going to blow the game in the fourth. You could feel it, couldn't you? I agree. It was a lot. Yeah, well, 31 was the Ravens score, 33 the Browns. But you could tell the momentum kind of got sucked out of the stadium, and it was rough for them because Cleveland had opportunities throughout the game, but so did Baltimore. I mean, Baltimore had opportunities to put Cleveland away, and they just could not do it as well. And Antonio Clark, I agree with this point here. After the muffed punt, the game should have been in the bag 1,000%. I 1,000% agree with that point. That should have been the game. And Baltimore had a tough time getting it in the end zone, but they did. They were up 2 scores, and that should have been it as well. John saying we were winning for more than 59 minutes in this game. Yeah, the Ravens have been trailing the least amount of time in the NFL all season. It's about 60 minutes less, they've been trailing. I think it was 28 minutes for the Ravens and like 83 or something for the Chiefs. They're the next closest team. Baltimore's barely trailed this year. Imagine trailing for 28 minutes all season. We're 10 weeks in, all season, and you got 3 losses out of that. It's just, these fourth quarter leads, these late game collapses, they cannot continue to happen. Justin saying Marcus Williams is a liability on D. It's his first game back. I'll give him some slack, but I thought he made a play or 2, but I didn't really notice him a ton in this one as well. John saying we got out coached today. Yeah, I thought Kevin Stefanski made some good plays, but Cleveland was sloppy for a lot of this game. Now, I'll give him credit in the second half. They came back, they did their thing, but yeah, I don't know. It was tough. Justin saying our 2 worst statistical games defensively this season when Marcus was on the field and not healthy. Well, I don't know where the health situation is for Marcus at this point. I would have thought they'd give him enough time to come back from both the arm and the hamstring thing, but we'll see. Aaron saying, I'm pretty objective. The Browns basically scored on every play. If you told me we would be up 14, Lamar had an early pick and recover from it, we couldn't get off the field, I'd say you're crazy. Yeah, even like the second play of the game was it? Yeah, Kyle Hamilton with the pick 6. You're thinking, all right, that gives you enough cushion. They go up early. They have the dominant first quarter, first half. There was their interception and things, but I thought Baltimore played well enough in the first half to win the game then. And then the second half, again, they come out the Odell 40-yard touchdown. But the second half, they did not play winning football, and I just didn't think that they wanted it as badly as Cleveland did. Island Vibe saying, Monken put Mitchell on a milk carton. Yeah, in the second half, dude went missing when he was doing so well. My only explanation, and I'm not trying to justify it, I'm just trying to explain it, is that the Ravens felt like against that huge Browns front, they needed a bigger bruiser back in there, but it didn't work. I mean, Keaton Mitchell was giving you some juice. I get that he had a couple of net negative plays in terms of the negative 7-yard rush and the 2-yard rush, which wasn't great, but Gus Edwards wasn't doing you many favors also. So Mitchell definitely deserved more as well. Let's see. Brown Grass saying the simple truth is Baltimore has a better quarterback and honestly a bit better defense, but you wouldn't swap Watson for Jackson. Things will work out unless the plane crashes in week 12 on the way to LA. I mean, I think that for Baltimore, their roster is still good, right? I think there's a lot to talk about when they have the opportunity to recover. But this loss, you kind of look at it and you might be looking at it in January and say, man, I really wish the Ravens would have had that one because it might come down to a game with how the AFC is kind of shaped up, how the AFC North is shaped up, right? I mean, there's a lot to work out. Jim Taggart saying maybe Baltimore should steal someone else's team. God. I mean, I know there's that rivalry. I get it, but I don't know. Baltimore has some work to do. Yamil saying Falele coming up now. The line is on fire. I mean, there's going to be some conversations. Hopefully Morgan Moses can be back next week. And if Stanley has to miss some time, hopefully not. But if he does, Patrick Marquez can flip back over to the left side. Chris saying greetings from Germany. That's cool. I appreciate you tuning in, Chris. Tough loss, but we always come back stronger. I mean, that's what it's been, where the Ravens have kind of been flip-flopping a lot in terms of performances. Seattle dominant week 7. Cardinals almost lose that game week 8. Seahawks dominant week 9, then they come back and play this game in week 10. So hopefully the trend continues and the Ravens can bounce back against the Bengals in week 11. Let's see. I see Up South, I think, responding to a comment earlier. We got a lot of comments here saying you have to fire Harbs if that happens. I think that's referring to the divisional or wild card as well. I'm going to again do speed rushing through the comments. Kobe saying our pass rushers not taking advantage of the Browns' backup offensive lineman. Yeah, the way with Conklin and Jedrick Wills and DeJuan Jones being out, the fact that it wasn't more dominant for the Ravens, and at least in terms of getting the guy, getting Deshaun Watson on the ground, they couldn't do it. And that was disappointing for sure. Let's see. Good America saying they got reckless up 2 touchdowns in the 4th, refused to run the ball. I was a little flabbergasted the fact that they decided to move away from the run so much. I do think they maybe got a little too cute as well. Let's see. Kobe, when McDonald's scheme isn't working and depending on our edge players make a play, it's non-existent. They tried to be aggressive, but what was happening was Deshaun Watson was flipping it out to David Njoku, flipping it out to Kareem Hunt, flipping out to Jerome Ford, quick shots to Elijah Moore. That's what you're supposed to do. And the Ravens couldn't recover, especially when they were being out physicaled as well. Dante saying I jinxed all the injuries. Dante, oh, man. I really hope it's not anything serious for those guys. I look, what I said, what Dante is referring to is I said that since week 3, the Ravens have been pretty healthy. And I mean, this was a game that maybe could have shifted the Ravens season in terms of injuries. Now, every team obviously can't stay healthy for the entire season. Everybody goes through it, but the Ravens seem to go through it a lot more than others. So we'll see. They had a good stretch of non-injuries, but this game was not that as well. Good America saying every Ravens loss happens the same exact way. Yeah, there are definitely similarities as well. Let's see. We got more comments as well in here. Dylan saying, where's Darby, who was really good when Humphrey was out earlier in the season? If Humphrey's done or if he's going to miss some time, we're definitely going to have to see him in this game as well. I mean, there are going to be the next man up mentality. It worked for the Ravens early in the season. If Humphrey and if Stanley have to go down or have to miss time by going down, we're going to have to see some Ronald Darby out there, maybe some Patrick McCary, some Daniel Falele. It's going to be very, very interesting what this team is able to do. Justin saying, don't think Monk understands the AFC North is won by playing smash mouth football. Stop trying to get cute. Doesn't work over here. Yeah, play calling was suspect for me, especially in the second half. I just don't think Todd Monken was reading game flow very well. And it'd be one thing if it was only in this game. It's been multiple times this season. I just think the adjustment period has been a little slower than I thought coming into the year, where sure, it was going to take some time, right? But at the end of the day, I just think that you got to hit your peak. Not now. You got to start moving up to that point. And I don't know. Baltimore has a lot of stuff to work through. Jadeveon Clowney, Justin saying, hope he's good. I think he is. He came back in the game. Being down for the offensive lineman, having Falele out there at left tackle is a recipe for disaster. Yeah, for sure. I mean, Ben Cleveland comes in. That it was rough. The Ravens were dealing a ton with injuries in this game as well. Chris just Googled $15 million for Odell Beckham Jr. He had a play at the touchdown. I mean, I'm not blaming this one on Odell for sure, but let's see. Christie's saying Browns are more physical. Watson outplayed Lamar badly in the second half with third-team tackles. I mean, yeah, this was a game that Baltimore probably should have won, especially when it comes down to their injury situation and what happened with Cleveland's tackles, but Baltimore suffers injuries of their own, and they just couldn't recover from what was going on as well. So, yeah, I mean, I'm looking through all these comments. I'm probably not going to be able to get to all of them. We have so many in here. Usual suspects saying Cleveland's defense kicked in, and Watson only completed like 20% of his passes in the first half as opposed to him returning in the second half, going 13 for 13 before I stopped checking. Yeah, it was night and day between the first half and the second half. Justin saying Prochet tried to help us out. Raven legend, by the way, James Prochet, trying to give the Ravens back the game. But unfortunately, Baltimore, even though they didn't do much with it, but I don't know. There's a lot to look forward to for the Ravens moving forward, but there's also a ton to clean up. And if they can't clean it up, there's going to be less and less to look forward to as the year goes on as well. So all in all, Baltimore played a sloppy second half game. Was honestly disgusting how they lost this one. It feels icky in my opinion. And we still going to get into this throughout the course of the rest of the week as well. Baltimore still up in the AFC North, but Cleveland obviously gets a game on them. Pittsburgh gets a game on them with the win, and Bengals coming to town on Thursday night, so we'll see what ends up happening there. So, again, I appreciate you tuning into this live edition of Locked On Ravens. Thank you so much. Even in the midst of a loss, we'll be back here at some point, whether it's tomorrow, later tonight, if there's a Marlon Humphrey, Ronnie Stanley injury update, or before then, we will see. But I'll see you right back here soon on Locked On Ravens. Be sure to subscribe, follow along in audio form. Really appreciate it. Be sure to stay tuned. I'll see you right back here soon on Locked On Ravens.